Hello, Car Motivators followers. I'm Sean Kelley, the TheCarBizCoach, CEO of Car Motivators and author of The Visitor. And on this edition of the Automotive Leaders Winning Cultures webcast, today we have the CEO of the National Independent Automobile Dealers Association, NIADA, Mr. Bob Voltmann. Bob, it's great to have you on. Thank you for joining us. The big question looming right now is Baylor football cursed for being dubbed the Big 12 favorite going into the 2022 season?
I think that's right. It is the cursed and comeback team. I can tell you that we went to the Cotton Bowl my senior year, and didn't go back until my sons were in college at Baylor. But since then, it's been rocking and rolling. I can't wait for the season to start. I have not been in the new stadium.
I bet you're excited to check that out.
I am.
Well, Bob, let's go ahead and dive in, my friend.
Yeah, let's.
Your resume speaks for itself as president of NIADA, and you're the first presidential appointee we've actually ever had on our webcast. Tell us a little bit about your backdrop. How did you end up as the president of NIADA?
So my career has been all advocacy and political affairs. I started out as a political consultant. I worked for a legislative session in the legislator in the Texas legislature one session. I've worked for two trade associations representing large land developers, getting them to work together to solve common problems. And I was lucky enough to be appointed by President George H.W. Bush to be chief of staff to a member of the Interstate Commerce Commission. So my wife and I went up as newlyweds and served the president, worked on deregulation, finishing the job of deregulation of transportation. I then went to a trade association when President Clinton beat President Bush. I went to a trade association representing large manufacturers and worked there to write the transportation rules for NAFTA and completely finish the job of deregulating the motor and rail transport sectors. I then left there and went to the Transportation Intermediaries Association, where I represented third-party logistics companies and served on the executive board of the International Federation of Freight Forwarders Associations. And then in May of 2020, after 23 years at TIA, I decided it was time for a change, and was looking. That industry had changed. It was no longer being run by small entrepreneurs, and I wanted to get back to working with small entrepreneurs and making a difference in their lives as they make a difference in their communities. And that is the home I found at NIADA.
Well, that is an amazing mission, and one I, as a young and budding startup company owner and someone who's founded a nonprofit, I respect your mission to help entrepreneurs. So much respect, and thank you for your service to our country. Being appointed a role by the president is nothing to sneeze at, right? That's a very important job. And what you said about deregulation is really interesting. I'd love to ask a little bit more about that. What sort of I guess because I was in the Army, I was in special ops, I got out, I started selling cars in 2004, and then I became a used car manager in 2007, and that's when I started dealing with transport a little bit. But I'm curious, what sort of obstacles were there with the transportation in the automotive industry that deregulating helped solve for?
Well, the deregulation started during the Carter administration, freeing up. Prior to 1980, the government had to approve all rates and routes. But after 1980, still left in place state regulation. And so until 1994, 5, 6, 7, somewhere in there, my memory is lapsing, states still heavily regulated intrastate transportation. For example, it was more expensive. This was one of the examples we used. It was more expensive for Mary Kay Cosmetics to ship something directly from Dallas to Houston than if they shipped it to Louisiana to Houston.
Wow.
Because then it became interstate commerce. The same thing happened in California. Why are there so many warehouses on the Arizona-California border and the Nevada-California border? Because it was cheaper to ship something out of California to Nevada and then right back, because then it became interstate commerce. Congress preempted that state regulation, and it really launched the logistics system we have today, which is the most efficient in the world. And just to put it in perspective, logistics as a percentage of GDP was about 24% in 1980, and today it's about 9%.
Wow.
So that's what the power of allowing the marketplace to work has.
That is a beautiful impact, and I can only imagine. So I guess I owe you thanks for all the vehicles I was able to buy from auctions in other states and ship them to my dealership here in St. Louis. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Well, that's pretty
I'm
cool.
glad I had a part in that.
Absolutely. And then you mentioned the part you're looking to play now, which is helping entrepreneurs. What kind of help are you able to provide for these entrepreneurs? And I'm guessing by entrepreneurs, you're referring to the automotive dealership world, community, and the vendors that serve them. Is that safe to say?
That's safe to say. So I worked with my third-party logistics, my small entrepreneur third-party logistics companies, and loved every minute of that. But as that industry changed, I wanted to get back to working with small entrepreneurs. And I found that with our independent used car dealers. I believe that small can beat big every day, as long as they play their own game and they know what their superpower is, which is service, that they don't ignore reality, and that they have a team behind them, and we're their team. So we can help them with advocacy and information and education and peer-to-peer networking, and discounted products and services.
And tell us more about when you say playing their own game. I love what you said there. It reminds me of one of my first calls with my mentor in the coaching world, and he shared with me that, he's like, you've got to make your own game and make your own, and then you have your own rules, and that's how you can win the game. So would you say more about that? Because I think that when you talked about service and dealerships winning, the small guy winning, I love what you said there. So tell us, what does that mean when you say winning, making your own game?
So one of my examples that I use is David and Goliath. We all know the story of David and Goliath. But what we don't know is, or what we gloss over, is, so Goliath was 6'9". He's clad head to toe in bronze armor. He's got a sword, a spear, and a javelin.
Scary individual.
Scary individual. David's the only volunteer Saul has. So they try to put him in armor, give him a sword, a spear, and a javelin. And he said, no, that's not who I am. I'm a slinger. I mean, we remember from Sunday school and Bible study that he was a shepherd, but he was actually part of the army as a slinger. So he goes as he is. He picks up 5 rocks. He walks toward Goliath, because remember, if you're fighting with a sword, it's close contact fighting. And he puts his rock in his sling and he spins it up and lets it go, and it hits Goliath smack in the forehead with the speed and impact of a .45 caliber bullet. Down he goes. So David knew who he was, and he knew that's who he had to be. Another example is, my wife and I were lucky enough when our younger son went off to college. We went to the Caribbean in January, and we realized we were flying home to a snowstorm. So I called our little local hardware store, and they said, "Oh yeah, Mr. Voltmann, your snowblower's ready." I said, well, here's the deal. I won't get there in time to pick it up before the snow starts. No problem. We'll put it in your shed for you with an extra gallon of fuel, just like Home Depot or Lowe's would do, right?
Mhm.
Yeah, no.
I was going to say, maybe if you paid them a couple thousand extra dollars under the table.
So small business can be big business if they know who they are and they know what their superpower is, and their superpower is service.
I love what you said. I couldn't agree more. Some of the most successful dealers I work with, one of my dealers, Paul Sansone Jr., principal of Junior's Easy Auto Center, talks about our handshake has to be better than the competition's. It's that simple. And being involved you're in the community, you can be involved in that community. He does this Hope for a Ride thing where he gives, he goes to different churches, gives away a free car every quarter or so, which, might think that's crazy with how hard it is to get inventory right now. But it's paid dividends because if you take care of the community, they take care of you. And it's and when the employees at the dealership also believe that, it starts at the top, right? So if the top believes in those relationships, I couldn't agree more than the front line will. And then that you can't put a price on customer retention. So great info and great reminder for all the entrepreneurs out there that are watching this webcast. And you mentioned your deep background in the third-party logistics sector, and you're familiar with who we interviewed on the Car Motivators webcast last week in Assertus and Trent Brober. And so we had a great convo about how the current economy has kind of been impacting things. So through your perspective as the president of NIADA, how has the current economy impacted the overall vehicle transport industry, like from an independent dealer standpoint?
Independent dealers are having to look farther afield to get inventory. Inventory is tight for everyone, and so they're looking farther from their normal market. Many of them come to the DFW area because they're looking for pickups or four-wheel drives or cars without rust. And then they have to get those back to their market. And that's where Assertus comes in. Trent's a rock star. I know him from my previous role, in his previous role. So as the dealers look farther afield for vehicles and they're competing more against the new car stores for those vehicles, because there are no new cars, or there weren't new cars, that's why transporting those vehicles back to the dealership becomes so important.
Yeah, I see. And you're so knowledgeable in the auto transport arena, as it relates to looking for a great transport partner, what should a dealership avoid and what should a dealership seek out as it relates to a partnership, a good vendor partner in the transport industry? So
whenever anyone causes a motor carrier to be on the road, when you've hired a motor carrier, you need to, and that includes auto transport, whether that's one of the big 18 wheels with the stacked cars on it, or the guy with a pickup truck and a gooseneck trailer behind it with 3 cars on it, or 2 cars, or 1 car. When you cause a truck to be on the road, you need to make sure that motor carrier is properly licensed, does not have an unsatisfactory safety rating, and is properly insured. And you have to do all of that at the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration website, fmcsa.gov. And their system there is called SaferSys. Many of our dealers today use services where they can look and hire a motor carrier transport. That service is just a dating service. They've done nothing to vet those carriers. They've done nothing to make sure that carrier's properly licensed, has a better than unsatisfactory safety rating, and is properly insured. Assertus is doing that. Assertus is a third-party logistics company, is looking at those things and making sure that the motor carriers they hire are safe to move that vehicle. So what happens? if you hire an auto transport and they have an accident and hurt someone, the federal government requires that carrier to have $750,000 in liability insurance. Most motor carriers carry $1 million. That doesn't go very far in a lawsuit. So then they go looking for the deep pockets, which could be the dealer that put that truck on the road. And there's a whole bevy of case law building around this. And that's why I say dealers who hire motor carriers directly need to have a written system, and they need to follow it every time. They have to check that license. They need to check the safety rating, and they need to check the insurance every time, or they open themselves up to liability.
Yeah, I would have never thought that there was so much potential exposure, legal exposure at the transportation level. And it's interesting how many dealers focus around red flags or the financial compliance side of things, but on the logistics side, maybe don't pay much attention to it. So this is great info. If you're
it's just because there haven't been lawsuits in this sector yet. But in a downturn economy, even lawyers have downturns and they start looking for new areas to sue or expand into. You see, as you drive around the country and you look at billboards, you'll see lawyers advertising, been in a truck accident, call me. That's what they're doing. They're suing the trucking company, their insurance company, and the people who who caused that truck to be on the road.
Wow. Well, that's great info. And that's one that could save some of our listeners potentially millions of dollars. So thank you for that wisdom.
You're welcome.
And thank you for sharing that website. We'll make sure that there's a link in the comments for people to click through so they can kind of vet their transport company.
Oh, great.
And guys, please listen to Bob here. If President Voltmann, do you prefer Bob or President Voltmann, by the way? Bob, okay. Bob, please listen to Bob when he shares that and vet your transport companies. Go check them out, make sure they're on the site, and that way you can protect yourself from that exposure. Let's talk a little bit more about the NIADA body as a whole. How big exactly is the membership body, and how many total independent dealers are there in America right now?
We have 16,000 members.
Wow.
We have 33 state associations that are affiliated with us. The market is, there's a lot of estimates about the market. We still see plenty of room to grow as an association. And we see plenty of opportunity. We know new dealers coming in. We know it's a very healthy market. New dealers come in, dealers retire. Yeah,
it's interesting seeing the dealer base owned by maybe the baby boomer generation that's been selling off. There's been a lot of dealership transactions lately. Have you been seeing that in the independent realm as well?
Yes, we have, and generational changes.
Right.
I was just at our South Carolina affiliates meeting where their new board leader is the third generation from his family to be president of the board, which is a very cool thing and very rare in the association world.
What's that?
That you have three generations so committed to an industry and an association that for 3 generations they've had the chief elected officer position.
Wow, that's pretty cool. That takes so much involvement. One of my dealers has been on the Missouri Automotive MADA, Missouri Automobile Dealers Association board, and had been the president. And it's amazing how dedicated people like you and like your third generation dealer are to the entire dealer community. What do you think? What are your favorite benefits? I guess that the entrepreneurs, the dealers part of the NIADA that they receive from being on that community.
It's that interconnectedness. It's knowing that there are people just like you that want to do the right thing. and people who are willing to help you, even if you're right next door and you're competing. I heard the story last night of a dealer whose DMS crashed, and they couldn't do contracts. And so they called somebody and they said, you know what? Just send it all the information over here. We'll put your name on it, change our contracts to your name, and we'll get them and send them right back to you so you can do those deals. That's what it's about. It's about good dealers helping each other be better.
Amen. It's that's one of the things I love about the Car Motivators community is we'll come up with a growth plan with one dealer group or dealership, and then I'll see another dealer that needs that same info, what worked, what didn't, to share with them to help. And I always ask permission, but when we ask them, hey, can we share this with one of my other dealers who could use help in this area? I've never had one say no. I love that about the automotive world, how it really is. It's like it's a huge community, but it's so tight knit, and everyone overall, it seems like the vast majority of everyone wants to help each other, which is pretty rare, I think. And what you'd said earlier about the third generation, I think that's one of it. I would love for you to share any tips and pointers. That's probably one of our niches at Car Motivators in our leadership development area that when we coach dealers is we help the younger generation, the second or third generation, learn to lead and run a business, right? Over just the tactical role that they're in. So we help them so when doing that, one of my dealers recently told me one of the reasons for him working with us was he said the third generation success rate is like really low. I think he said 15%. I don't know where he got that information from, but so he's like, that's why I use you. And I guess through your lens, I want to ask, what can these younger dealers do to ensure success? What, especially the second or third generation dealers in the independent realm.
It's very common on family business that the first generation builds it up and it disappears by the third generation. So the key there is just what you just said. It's having a coach, because the struggles that the first generation went through to build that business are not experienced by the second. And there's rarely a training mechanism. I mean, I've heard parents talk about, we started our kids, they had to clean the bathrooms. Does that really prepare you for reading balance sheets and checking trends? It does prepare you for being humble and knowing that it's not about you, but they need that help to understand, because these businesses are complex, and especially if you're in the buy here, pay here space, you're not even really selling cars. You're selling paper. But for all of it, there's information. You've got to watch and measure. You have to understand trends, and that's where training comes in, from NADA, from NIADA, from Car Motivators. Avail yourself of a coach, and you can't just rest on your laurels or the work that was done before you. Babe Ruth said, "Yesterday's home runs don't win tomorrow's games." So you have to be playing today's game and looking forward to what's coming tomorrow.
Right. Yeah. You reminded me that one of my favorite sayings, that the species that survive the longest on the planet Earth are the ones that adapt the quickest. And I think the industry is in a major paradigm shift right now. The demand for used inventory has never been more competitive. I mean, it's still the auction prices and trade values continue to amaze me. Well, I guess I'd be curious to know how is your membership base, the entire community, handling these incredibly competitive challenge of inventory acquisition right now?
It's a challenge. It's easy. but it's still a challenge. And as I said earlier, they're going farther afield. But the other thing that's changing in the marketplace is we have come to expect Amazon service, Google speed, and Apple design in everything we do. People don't want to spend all day at the dealership. They want that simple Amazon buying experience. They want something fast and convenient and friendly. And that's a major paradigm shift for the auto industry. But if our independents and our franchise dealers are going to compete with major companies that have huge amounts of money behind them to make the experience easier and simpler, our folks are going to have to do the same thing.
So it's about the handshake, right? And the relationship and the service.
But you can't ignore reality. And the reality is, just have you bought something on Amazon today? I have.
Yesterday, late yesterday. It was almost today.
Why? Because it's so easy.
Convenient.
We want that in everything we buy. Cars are no different.
Yeah, and it's interesting how that applies to the sales side of things and the service side of things. And yet at the same time, it seems like dealers it's a bigger struggle than ever to, get cars reconditioned and frontline ready. And at the same time, staffing issues and I think a lot of it, and maybe again, the baby boomers retired after COVID, but service departments are short staffed across the country. What do you think? How can your independent dealers best address the speed situation when there's so many obstacles to getting things done fast right now?
They just have to. Everybody, the number one shortage in the United States and Canada are people. We went from having a growing population. We were the only Western country with a net positive growth to a shrinking population. We almost overnight started looking like Europe. We need people. We need people to get off the couch and go back to work. We need new immigrants. And we need to be able to have that debate at an adult level in our nation's capital. But everybody, did you ever in your life is not as long as mine's been, but did you ever in your life think you would see McDonald's offering a signing bonus?
Never thought I'd see it.
No, I worked at McDonald's as a kid to earn date money. It was not a career.
I was at Hardee's and I thought it was going to be my career, but no, I'm just kidding. No, that's a really great point. And we wonder, should we offer a signing bonus for a technician? It's a no-brainer, right? If McDonald's is doing it.
If you don't have one and you can't service the car without it, it becomes a redundant question.
Yeah, and to your point, we just had a really interesting thing play out with one of our dealer service departments where they had a union negotiation and 5 technicians quit supposedly because of the union negotiation. Well, we did a little, I guess, post-career interview with each of them and found out that it was they quit the culture. The union negotiation had nothing to do with it. So we worked to develop the culture and ended up being able to bring them back in, same pay as they left at, that the union contract was agreed, but it was the culture. And I think, dealers are either going to have to invest a bunch of money to recruit the right people and replace them, or you can invest in the ones you have and try to build that team and that culture. And if you do that, what we see is that it actually attracts people. You don't have to go out and find them anymore because people want the word gets out, right? It's that small world of the car business. Give us some of the dealers that you get to work with. What's best practice around building an amazing culture? What do you see that works?
It's all different, but it's building on their superpower. It's service. It's knowing who their people are. It's being flexible. It's, at an independent dealership, that culture is much different than being at a franchise dealership. It's more family. It's I don't want to say an easier pace, but it's a different pace.
Mm-hmm.
So again, they have to know their superpower. And I read recently, one of the phrases that we all have to learn in business is when somebody leaves, instead of saying goodbye, tell them they're welcome to come back.
Wow.
Because we have, just like we have a shortage of vehicles, we have a shortage of people who are willing to work. And that's going to continue to get worse, not better.
Really?
For the foreseeable future, until we open, and bring in more immigrants that can do those jobs, or figure out what motivates someone to come back into the workforce. But there's some 2 million baby boomers that left the workforce
Wow.
during the pandemic and have not come back.
You know what? I love what you just said there. What motivates them to come back into the workforce? There was you'll love this one, Bob. There was a dealer of mine. We had a master certified technician. He'd been there for 30, 40 years, a long time. And literally he was about to quit. And we had a similar convo. Myself and the service manager sat down with him and, hey, well, what would it take you to stay? And if you he's like, well, there's no way you would do that. And we're like, do what? Right. We just listened to him. And it was amazing. And that's what does family do, right? When I love what you said about family, because family listens to one another and cares about one another and tries to help each other achieve their goals. So we said, no, we care. What is it that we could do, if anything? Imagine anything's possible. He said, well, I get really cold in the winter up here in New Jersey. And if I could just go down to Florida for a month or two during the winter with my wife and stay at our winter home, come back and, be a tech again. After that, I'd stay here until I could no longer turn a wrench. And the service manager's like, done. And he's still there today. That was 2-3 years ago.
Right. If you have a good employee, do whatever you can to keep them, because it's going to be harder and harder to replace them.
Amen. All right. So tough question for you to answer. I know you're going to be great though. Is now a better time to own a buy here, pay here lot, a regular independent dealership, or a franchise dealership, and why?
Yeah, that's a tough question. So a good friend of mine once said, I've got friends on one side of the issue and friends on the other side of the issue, so I'm going to be with my friends. All three are different. I would much rather be on I think I represent the independent guys, so I'm going to have to side with the independent guys, but I'm not picking between retail independence and buy here, pay here independence.
Well, I like what you said, right? You've got that superpower, which is the service and the family and the team culture and the community. I think if you combine those things, it does make sense and it sounds like you believe they can all succeed and thrive, right? Even in these times.
I do, but in tough economic times, so it's very expensive to be poor in America. We are in inflation. We're in a very weird time. We're in an inflationary period with very low unemployment. But new vehicle prices have become astronomically expensive. And with interest rates now going up, really for the first time in 40 years,
right,
that's going to push more and more people out of the new car market. That's going to hurt the franchisees that have commitments to the OEMs. It's also going to put a lot more pressure on the used car market, the used vehicle market, where those franchisees, the independent retailers, and the buy here, pay here subprime folks are all competing for the same vehicles.
Yeah. As you were talking, I was wondering, is this the dawn of the used car, right? With chip and supply chain disruptions likely due to the geopolitics. I mean, the whole EV thing, which requires supposedly twice the microchips and all that we already are short on. I mean, is this the dawn of the used car? I remember in my time in Iraq and Bosnia in the military, just remembering every car I saw looked like it was 20 to 30 years old. And I could see, is that the route we're taking here in America? Is that going to be the situation? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, we've been in the era of the used car, and we saw used cars become an appreciating asset, which nobody thought possible.
Right.
But they are. And again, as new vehicle prices increase, and now interest rates have more than doubled, and it takes 18 months for a Fed rate hike to work its way all the way through the market.
Wow.
So we're 18 months at least into this, or ahead of us. So people are being priced out of that new car market. And it's just going to continue to put pressure on the used vehicle market. And if you have people like me who have a very decent vehicle, I'm not getting rid of it because I don't know that I can get a new one.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no doubt. I'm in the same boat, right? We have a decent vehicle. The miles are fair. It's in great condition. And normally, in normal circumstances, we probably would have traded in a year ago, but we're just going to hold on to it a little longer.
Right.
I completely understand. Great insight. And I would have never guessed that it took 18 months for the Fed for a rate hike to affect the whole economy. So it'll be interesting to see how it affects everything that we deal with on a day-to-day basis over time. What are the main?
Right.
All right,
some things like loans are immediate. You see what's happened with mortgage rates. They doubled in a year. People know what car loans are doing if they can even get a car loan. But it takes a long time for rent increases to work their way through and other things.
True. So buy everything you want to buy now, people. All right. So what's the main? All right. Let's switch gears a little bit, and definitely interesting times and things that everyone business owners need to be aware of and plan for. So thank you for sharing all that, Bob. As it relates to the as it relates to the NIADA boardroom or Zoom rooms as of late, what are some of the main topics of conversation?
So we're talking about the Federal Trade Commission's safeguards rule that go into effect on December the 9th. And those are going to, every dealership is affected by this, and dealerships that have more than 4,000 customer identifying records. That's not sales. It's anything customer identification related.
Wow.
Have more hoops to jump through. And the really scary part of this rule is it's not so much going to be enforced by the government. It's going to be enforced by trial lawyers should there be a breach. And if you didn't have your plan and you didn't follow it, you could be facing a class action lawsuit. Yikes. So, yeah, it's very scary. I know that we have materials. NADA has materials. I'm sure IADA has materials to help our dealers prepare for this. So we're talking a lot about that. We're talking about the tax bill that just passed the Senate and is now pending in the House, and what that means. And what does 80,000 more IRS auditors mean for S corps?
Yeah, that's an interesting, could lead to some serious diversions or distractions from business focus, which is really where entrepreneurs need to be focused right now, not on protecting your assets is key, but the distractions that come with an audit or something. Could you say on the safeguard, and I know when do dealers need to have their plan by on the safeguard?
December the 9th.
Okay, gotcha. And what are some of the biggest risks that they could face if they don't have a plan? What do they
Well,
need?
the rule requires, and this rule has been in place for financial institutions. It is now expanded to anyone who collects identifying information about consumers, our dealers. They have to make sure that they have to have a qualified individual. They have to do training. They have to have response plans. They're responsible for their vendors keeping information safe. So I was just at a meeting where somebody said, well, my DMS provider will keep it all safe. No, you're responsible for your DMS provider. So you better make sure that they are keeping it safe. And it's all about protecting the consumer. So, it's going to be a process for us all, and it's going to be somewhat challenging to get that process, but the goal is good. We'd all like more time because I don't think anybody paid attention to it but December 9th is coming up on us quickly. And it's not like you're going to get shut down, but if you don't have your plan or you're not developing your plan and something happens, you could face serious challenge.
Yeah, I think a lot of the software companies out there need to be very leery of that and adapt accordingly. I remember in my tenure with DriveCentric CRM, the first conference we went to was a driving sales event, I believe, and then there was a lot of Canadian dealers there, and it was interesting when they started bringing up the castle laws they have up north and how it was, which sounds similar to this one, where it's very, very strict around who you can call after how much time in your database. And so it sounds like this is really critical for making sure.
Well, this is more about protecting data. So if you collect a driver's license, because someone's going to go on a test drive, how are you protecting that driver's license that it isn't going to be stolen, or credit information, or any identifying information of a consumer has to be protected. And we know that there are no goodniks out there trying to hack everybody to get this information. So again, the goal is good, but it's one of those, there's going to be a lot of pain between now and December the 9th.
Maybe you can pull some of your political strings and get this to where it's not enforced by trial lawyers. That would be great, Bob. We'll cross our fingers.
I think that ship has sailed.
Okay, we're too late. Well, Bob, where do you see the future of the used car market over the next 10 years as gas gets phased out, if gas gets phased out?
I don't believe gas is going to get phased out. I do believe the government has its thumb on the scale. And it's definitely tipping toward electric. I think if the marketplace was allowed to sort itself out, that we might be looking at more hydrogen or compressed natural gas. But up until the Obama administration started putting limitations on drilling, we had gone from an oil importing country to an oil exporting country. And in fact, at the end of the Bush administration, the W. Bush administration, we were producing more oil than Saudi Arabia and Kuwait combined.
Wow.
So what the real question I believe we should be having, or the real discussion we should be having, is, number one, do consumers want to drive electric vehicles? Is it even practical? You have a 10,000 unit apartment complex. How many chargers are you putting in? Can you drive 400 miles without it becoming an overnight trip? Because they'll say they have this range, but the range on the highway is much less. because you're not braking and adding more fuel. And then the other thing that happens with electric vehicles is a lot of the premise on savings is based on one person in the vehicle. So when you add more weight, it changes that dynamic. So I think what we saw when gas prices jumped to $5 a gallon is the realism that the American people don't want to give up their gasoline-powered vehicles, and they're going to react negatively to the government that forces that gas price to get to $10 a gallon, which is what it's going to take. And then politicians need to be honest. They ran from those $5 and $6 and $7 gasoline per gallon. Oh, it's the oil company's fault. It's the service station's fault. No, it's your fault. Your policies created that. Own it. If you want people to get out of their gasoline-powered vehicles, own that you're going to raise gas prices to $10 a gallon. And let's have that debate at the ballot box.
Right.
For those people who live in urban areas, I don't agree. I think electric vehicles are cool. I just saw is it the Rivian, the pickup truck, yesterday. Somebody had it here at the hotel that I'm at. It's great, but I'm a believer in the free market and the belief that the market should sort this out and not the government.
I'm with you 100%, Bob. I'm trying to find something we disagree on here, but no. And what you said about the questions, right? Like, do people even want this? I think that's what it boils down to is like, can we ask the hard questions and then have well thought out answers, right? Can our power grid support this? And what happened? What sort of, how much will it cost to add all these class 2 and chargers to apartment complexes, gas stations everywhere, right? And who's going to pay for that? Which we know it's going to be the taxpayer. Which so the bunch of people who maybe aren't behind it. But yeah, and I don't want to sound like I'm anti-EV because I just had a Tesla rental the other day when I was traveling, and it was a really awesome, fun car to drive. But at the end of the day, we got to ask the tough questions, and we need to have good, honest, well thought out answers. And I love what you said about the politicians owning it. It's like if you're going to make a decision, stand by it. Couldn't agree more. But Bob Voltmann, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and your insights. And thank you for protecting our amazing automotive dealer base. We really appreciate you. And I wish you good fortune moving forward. And please keep fighting the good fight.
Thanks, Sean.
It was an absolute honor to host you on our show. And for the Automotive Leaders Winning Cultures webcast, I'm Sean Kelley, the Car Biz Coach. Have an awesome day. And thanks for tuning in.